From enemies to brothers. The encounter over Germany. Location: over northern Germany, near Bremen. The skies above Germany were a deadly arena in late 1943. Every day, hundreds of bombers from the United States Army Air Forces soared across enemy skies, bringing devastation to the heart of the Third Reich. The airmen knew their chances of survival were slim. German fighters and anti-aircraft guns waited for them like hawks circling their prey. Among those young American pilots was Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, commander of a B-17 Flying Fortress, nicknamed Ye Old Pub. It was his very first mission, a cold, gray morning, filled with fear and determination. The crew of 10 men climbed aboard their bomber, loaded with bombs meant for a target deep inside Nazi Germany. As they approached Bremen, flak German anti-aircraft fire filled the sky with black bursts of smoke. The bomber shook violently as shrapnel tore through its metal frame. One of its engines was hit. The oxygen system was destroyed. Gun turrets jammed. Holes ripped through the fuselage, and several crew members were badly wounded. Still, Charlie Brown refused to turn back. Against all odds, he held the bomber steady and dropped his payload over the target. But on their way out, the real nightmare began. From the clouds above, a group of Luftwaffe fighters swooped down like predators. Focke-Wulf 192nd and Messerschmitt Bf 109nd attacked relentlessly. Within minutes, the B-17 was torn apart, its tail shredded, one engine dead, another smoking, and the nose gunner gravely injured. Somehow, miraculously, the bomber still flew. Alone and crippled, Ye Old Pub drifted eastward, away from its formation. The crew prepared for death. Blood froze on their uniforms, oxygen masks failed, and their guns were nearly useless. Then came the final approach. A single German fighter closed in. The end seemed certain, but instead of opening fire, the German plane held back. Its pilot was Franz Stigler, a veteran Luftwaffe ace with more than 20 victories to his name. He had taken off moments earlier to intercept the wounded American bomber. As he approached the damaged B-17, he could see the terror and exhaustion in the faces inside. The rear gunner was slumped over, motionless. The plane was barely airborne. For Stigler, this was not a victory, it was a massacre. He remembered the words of his commanding officer. "If I ever see you shooting a man in a parachute, I'll shoot you myself. You fight with honor, not for revenge." And so, against all rules of war, Franz, Stigler made a fateful decision, one that would define both their lives forever. The Act of Mercy. Location: northern Germany. Skies near the North Sea. Time: midday, December 20, 1943. The crippled B-17 Flying Fortress, Ye Old Pub, staggered through the frozen air, its engines coughing smoke, its body shredded by cannon fire. Inside, chaos ruled. The navigator was unconscious, the tail gunner dead, and the others wounded or barely clinging to life. Oxygen masks were frozen, instruments cracked, and blood froze to the metal floor. The pilot, Charlie Brown, fought to keep the bomber aloft, his hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. The horizon swayed before his eyes. He knew he wouldn't make it home. Then, through the shattered glass of the cockpit, Brown saw a flash of silver at German Messerschmitt Bf 109, closing in. His heart sank. This is it, he thought. We're done. But instead of finishing them off, the German fighter moved alongside the bomber's wing. Brown and his co-pilot could see him clearly now, the black cross of the Luftwaffe painted on his fuselage, the yellow nose of his aircraft gleaming against the clouds. The German pilot, Franz Stigler, studied the battered American plane in silence. He saw gaping holes in its frame, smoke trailing from its engines, and terrified faces staring back at him. Through the side window, he caught sight of a wounded gunner struggling to stay conscious. Stigler's training screamed at him to pull the trigger, to finish his mission and protect his homeland. But another voice spoke louder, his conscience. He had been raised in a time of knights, honor, and chivalry when warriors respected courage, even in their enemies. And what he saw before him was not an enemy. It was bravery, stripped bare and bleeding. With a deep breath, Stigler made an impossible choice. He signaled with his hands pointing west, toward the open sea. "Fly that way," his gesture said. "Go home." Charlie Brown didn't understand at first. Confused and half delirious, he watched as the German fighter took position beside him, not attacking, but escorting him. Together, the two planes, once enemies, flew side by side through enemy airspace. Below them, German anti-aircraft batteries held their fire, afraid to hit their own fighter. Stigler guided the wounded B-17 past the coast, ensuring it made it out of danger. He could have radioed for reinforcements, or simply destroyed the bomber where it flew helplessly. But instead, he saluted. Then, in one final act of grace, Franz Stigler looked across the cockpit and raised his hand, a gesture of respect between soldiers. Charlie Brown, stunned and near tears, returned the salute. And with that, the German ace banked his fighter away, disappearing into the gray clouds. The American crew would survive that, a miracle none of them could explain. But for Brown, one question would haunt him for decades. Who was the enemy pilot who spared my life? The search across time. Location: United States and Germany. Timeline: 1945-1988. The war ended, but the memory never did. When Charlie Brown returned home to America in 1945, the world was celebrating victory, but he carried a quiet question no one could answer. Amid parades and medals, he could still see that German pilot's face, calm, determined, human. Why did he let us live? For years, Brown spoke little about that mission. Like many veterans, he locked the trauma deep inside. He built a career, raised a family, and tried to move on. Yet every time he looked up at the night sky, he thought of the man in the Messerschmitt, the enemy who had shown mercy when no one else would. In his heart, he believed that man had saved not just his life, but his soul. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Franz Stigler lived a quiet life in post-war Germany. He had survived the collapse of the Third Reich, the bombings, and the chaos of surrender. But the war had changed him forever. He left the Luftwaffe, disgusted by the destruction and by what his country had become. He moved to Canada in search of peace, carrying his own ghost, the image of that shattered American bomber and the men he chose not to kill. Neither man knew the other's fate. Each assumed the other had perished long ago. But destiny had not finished with them. Decades later, 1988, one winter evening, nearly 45 years after that encounter, Charlie Brown sat at his desk in Miami, Florida. He was now a retired Air Force colonel, his hair gray, his eyes still sharp. He had told his story only once at a reunion of We Pilots. The room had fallen silent as he described the German fighter that escorted him home instead of killing him. Afterward, a fellow pilot urged him, "Charlie, you need to find that man. He deserves to know what he did." And so the search began. Brown wrote letters to veterans associations, Luftwaffe archives, and war museums. He contacted newspapers in Germany, hoping someone would remember. He even wrote to the Luftwaffe's historical office, describing the incident. December 20, 1943, B-17 damaged near Bremen, escorted to the North Sea by a German fighter who did not fire. Months passed. Then, one day, a letter arrived. A German pilot named Franz Stigler, living in Canada, read an article in a veteran's newsletter about an American bomber that had been spared by a mysterious Luftwaffe ace. His heart pounded as he read. The details matched exactly. He wrote back immediately, "I was that pilot." When Charlie Brown received the letter, his hands shook. After 45 years, after silence, fear, and memory, he had finally found him. The reunion: from enemies to brothers. Location: Vancouver, Canada. Date: 1990. 46 years had passed since that frozen December morning over Germany. Two old men, once enemies, now stood on the edge of history, about to meet face to face for the first time. When Charlie Brown stepped off the plane in Vancouver, his heart raced like it had in 1943. He had seen death, fire, and loss, but never had he felt a moment as heavy as this. Waiting for him in the terminal was Franz Stigler. the German pilot who had spared his life. As they saw each other, neither spoke. They simply stared, both knowing exactly who the other was. Two men connected by one impossible act of mercy. Finally, Franz stepped forward and extended his hand. Charlie took it, then, overwhelmed with emotion, pulled him into an embrace. For a long moment, the world was silent. Two soldiers, who had once tried to kill each other, now stood as friends, bound not by war, but by humanity. Over the next days, they talked endlessly, piecing together every moment of that long-ago flight. Franz described how he had seen the wounded crew inside the bomber, how he couldn't bring himself to fire. Charlie told him how, for decades, he had prayed to thank the man who saved him. Stigler admitted softly, "Charlie, I could not shoot. You were like a wounded bird, and I could not finish you." They laughed, they cried, and they remembered the friends they had lost. What began as a reunion became something far deeper, a brotherhood born in the ashes of war. From that day on, they spoke every week by phone, writing letters and visiting each other's families. They celebrated birthdays together, shared holidays, and told their story to schools and veterans groups. They wanted the world to know one truth: even in war, compassion is not weakness, it is courage. Charlie once told a reporter, "Franz was the kind of man I wish everyone could meet. He showed me what it really means to be a soldier and a human being." And Franz replied, "Charlie Brown is not my enemy. He is my brother." Final years. As time passed, their bond only grew stronger. When one was ill, the other called daily. When they traveled, they introduced each other as "my brother." They both passed away in 2008, just months apart, as if even death could not separate them for long. At Franz Stigler's funeral, one photo rested upon his casket, a picture of him and Charlie Brown, standing together, smiling, arms on each other's shoulders. Beneath it were the words, "My brother, my friend." The Legacy of Mercy. Timeline: 1990s-2008. Theme: The Power of Compassion Beyond War. The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler became more than a reunion between two former enemies. It became a living lesson about humanity, honor, and forgiveness. As the two aging veterans traveled together across the United States and Canada, they spoke before schools, airshows, and veterans gatherings. Wherever they went, audiences listened in silence, astonished by what they heard, a story that seemed almost impossible. Here were two men who had once tried to destroy each other's nations, standing side by side as friends. Not just friends, brothers. A message to the next generation. When they spoke to young people, Franz often said, "You are not defined by the uniform you wear, or by the orders you are given. You are defined by the choices you make, especially when no one is watching." Charlie would nod and add, "Franz taught me that courage is not just pulling a trigger. Sometimes, real courage is the strength to hold your fire." Their message spread far beyond military circles. Newspapers called it the gentleman's duel that never happened. Documentaries, books, and interviews followed. One of the most famous books to tell their story was A Higher Call by Adam Makos, a tribute to the extraordinary encounter that defied the savagery of war. Veterans remembered them differently. World War II veterans who heard the story often said it changed how they viewed their own experiences. It reminded them that even amid destruction, humanity could still survive. Many Luftwaffe and Allied pilots later said that the story of Stigler and Brown restored their faith in the code of honor, the ancient idea that even in war, there must be rules of respect, compassion, and moral strength. Brothers until the end. In their final years, Charlie and Franz often visited each other's homes. They would sit for hours looking through old photos, young men in flight suits, laughing, unaware of how short their youth would be. Sometimes they would sit quietly together, not needing words. They had already said everything that mattered. Back in the skies above Germany, on that freezing December day in 1943, when Franz passed away in March 2008, Charlie was heartbroken. Just a few months later, Charlie followed. Some said it was coincidence. Others believed it was fate, that two souls who met in mercy could not be apart for long. At the memorial service, a veteran spoke a single line that captured it all. They met as enemies in war, and parted as brothers in peace. Their legacy lives on. Today, the story of Franz, Stigler, and Charlie Brown stands as one of the greatest examples of compassion in the history of warfare. Their names are remembered not for how many enemies they killed, but for the one life they refused to take. Historical impact and global recognition. Theme: the story that changed how the world saw its enemies. After the deaths of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler in 2008, their story refused to fade away. Instead, it grew, spreading across the world as a shining example of what true honor and humanity look like, even in the darkest moments of war. A symbol beyond borders. Military academies in both Germany and the United States began teaching their story as a lesson in ethics, courage, and moral leadership. It became required reading in classes about rules of engagement and the code of honor. In the U.S. Air Force Academy, cadets were told, "This is what integrity looks like when you do the right thing, even when the whole world expects you not to." In Germany, Luftwaffe instructors spoke of Franz Stigler as an example of what it meant to be a soldier with a conscience, one who followed a higher code than orders alone. Their story became a bridge, proof that enemies could find respect and peace, even after generations of bloodshed. Media and literature recognition. In 2012, author Adam Makos published A Higher Call, a best-selling book that immortalized the story. It reached readers across the world, translated into dozens of languages. The book revealed their letters, their emotions, and the moments that defined their lives. It told not just a story of war, but of what it means to remain human during it. Television networks and documentarians soon followed. The BBC, the History Channel, and National Geographic produced programs, retelling their encounter in cinematic detail. Their story spread through schools, online communities, and social media, inspiring millions with a simple message: enemies are only enemies until you choose to see them as men. A moral legacy. To this day, the tale of Brown and Stigler is cited in leadership seminars, ethics courses, and humanitarian training programs. It reminds modern soldiers, politicians, and citizens that victory without morality is hollow, and that compassion can sometimes achieve what force never will. In the words of historian Stephen Ambrose, it is one of the few war stories that ends not in death, but in life, not in hatred, but in grace. Commemoration. At airshows around the world, replica B-17s and Messerschmitt Bf-109 seconds are sometimes flown together in tribute, one symbolizing "Ye Old Pub," the other Stigler's fighter. Audiences watch in awe as the two aircraft fly side by side, just as they did that day in 1943. A living reminder that mercy is timeless. Plaques and museum exhibits in both the US and Germany tell their story, ensuring that future generations never forget the true victory. History remembers countless battles, but only a few moments of peace. Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler showed the world that the greatest victories are not won in the skies or on the ground, they are won within the heart. The Legacy in the Sky, a story that touched the world. The wind over northern Germany in December 1943 carried more than snow and smoke. It carried a story that would outlive the war itself. A B-17 bomber, ye old pub, limped home through frozen clouds. Its wings were shredded, one engine gone, blood freezing to the fuselage. Inside, 10 young men fought to survive. Their leader, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, barely conscious, gripped the controls with hands stiff from blood and frost. Out of the mist appeared a sleek German Messerschmitt Bf 109, its guns glinting in the pale light. The American crew waited for the final burst of cannon fire that would end their lives. But it never came. At the controls of the fighter was Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe ace with more than 20 victories. Trained to defend his homeland, he was moments from another confirmed kill. Until he looked closer. Through the shattered glass of the bomber's tail, he saw the wounded, the terrified, and the helpless. Their eyes met his. In that instant, Stigler faced a choice greater than orders. He could destroy them and earn another medal, or he could listen to the voice of his conscience. He remembered his commander's warning from years before. You fight by rules. You do not kill for pride. You protect your honor, not your hatred. Franz Stigler lowered his hand from the trigger, the act that defied a war. For several minutes, the two aircraft hunter and prey flew together through enemy airspace. German gunners below held their fire, unsure why one of their own was escorting an American bomber. At the coastline, Stigler saluted the American crew, then rolled away and disappeared into the gray. That day, Charlie Brown and his men made it home against all odds. That day, Franz Stigler walked away, knowing he might be court-martialed or shot if anyone discovered what he had done. Yet both men carried something far heavier than fear, respect for the other's humanity. 40 years of silence. For decades, the memory haunted them. Brown wondered who the German pilot was, the man who had spared his life. Stigler, meanwhile, wondered if the bomber had ever made it home. The two lived separate lives on opposite sides of the Atlantic, each thinking of the other as a ghost of the past. Until, in 1988, a letter changed everything. Charlie's lifelong search finally reached the man he had never forgotten. In 1990, they met face to face in Vancouver. Two gray-haired veterans, once mortal enemies, now stood as brothers. They wept. They laughed. They remembered the sky that had once divided them. From that moment on, they called each other family, a legacy beyond nations. Their friendship became legendary. Together, they spoke at airshows, military academies, and schools, sharing a message that transcended all borders. Compassion is not weakness. Mercy is not cowardice. In war, being human is the hardest victory of all.